Hi, I'm Richard Munson, the author of Ingenious, a biography of Benjamin Franklin, scientist. My thanks to the Boulder Bookstore, a great community institution, for inviting me to talk a bit about my new book. They've asked me to pose and then answer a few questions. So here's hoping that what follows gives you an appreciation of this remarkable individual, Benjamin Franklin. So question number one, can you give us a brief synopsis of your book? Well, sure. Past Franklin biographies have largely ignored his observations and experiments, and instead have focused largely on his diplomacy, particularly his remarkable signing of agreements with France that provided money as well as ammunition for the United Colonies in their revolution against England. This is evidenced by the recent eight-part television series that starred Michael Douglas that focused on Franklin's observation. I would argue, however, with due respect to Franklin's power as a diplomat and one of the nation's founders, is that we wouldn't be discussing his diplomacy were it not for his fame as a leading scientist that opened the doors for him to meet with the intelligentsia and regular people of France, and be able to sign treaties to the advantage of the American Revolution. In fact, I would argue in Ingenious that science is the through line and not the outsider that integrates all aspects of his life, from tradesman to printer to diplomat to politician. So beyond the simplistic lessons that we learned, particularly about his kite experiment that we learned in grade school, what I tried to do is to offer some insights as to how Benjamin Franklin was doing leading edge research on things that were as diverse as electricity, heat, chemical bonds, and so much more. Another question, what inspired me to write this book? I've long been interested in innovators. My two most recent books, one was a biography of Nikola Tesla, and the other were profiles of 25 food and farm entrepreneurs. In this case, however, in addition to being fascinated with Franklin's innovation, I've been startled, I think, that in our current era, political activists are rejecting science and dismissing facts. And so I was drawn to one of our nation's most popular founders who embraced verifiable analysis. In our current age, also, we find jurists, sometimes calling themselves originalists, who were imposing their political and religious views of the Constitution. And I was therefore fascinated with Franklin, an actual originalist, who insisted that knowledge and laws evolve with changing circumstances. So Franklin's openness, I would point out, is reflected in the free speech that is advanced by libraries and bookstores. So once again, coming back to the Boulder Bookstore, just to commend it for its defense of the free exchange of ideas. Another question, what kind of research did you do while writing this book? I must just say, Franklin biographers are very lucky because we have access to online catalogs that have been developed by scholars at Yale University and the American Philosophical Society. They feature almost every single note that Franklin ever wrote to anybody and what they wrote back to him. So you can simply type in the name of some character that you want to investigate, and you'll come up with downloadable letters written from them or by Franklin to them. It's an amazing resource. Another question, what do you think it is that Benjamin Franklin is remembered today more as a politician than a scientist? Why is he so remembered? The pendulum swung back and forth on Franklin's legacy throughout the ages. Biographers, as I think people would recognize, as well as readers of history, are subject to their own evolving biases. My sense is that recent partisanship that has challenged science, and also recent historians that have been concerned about the growing partisan polarization as well as international strife, have tended to therefore focus more on Benjamin's diplomatic and political acumen than on his science. And I guess I'm trying in the book Ingenious to rectify that bias and to have us see him more fully, and particularly, as I said before, seeing science as a through line through all of his work. Another question, what was the most unexpected detail about Benjamin Franklin's life that you uncovered while writing his book? Well, I must say, it was largely his wry humor. I mean, the man uh, cracked me up often when just reading his notes. When even as a teenager, he was writing newspaper columns secretly as Silence Dogood, a middle-aged, opinionated widow, being written by a young teenage boy. And he crafted, some of these lines and got away with them in the newspaper. They were verging on the ribald. I mean, he said that women are the prime causes of a great many male enormities. Okay. And then later in life, as when he was already an accomplished scientist, he um, tried to put some perspective and some humor on and highlighting his profession's pretensions. So he prepared a proposal for the Royal Academy of Brussels to study the causes and cures of farts. So he claimed that there would be immortal honor to the researchers who determine how different foods alter the odor and the frequency of people's bodily emissions. So when I was reading his papers, I would often either smile or actually just crack up laughing. So another question, what are a couple of books that you read recently that you really loved? Unfortunately, there's a lot, but I was particularly impressed with Memoirs of Hadrian. This is Marguerite Yourcenar's, I hope I pronounced that right, brilliant reimagination of the emperor's reflections on character and the meaning of history. I also went back and read a part of Robert Caro's just insightful biography of Lyndon Johnson, particularly the segment called Master of the Senate, where you can almost feel this Democratic leader coming and grabbing your shoulder and breathing down your neck to make sure that you voted the way he wanted you to. So is there anything else, another question, that you want us to know about your book? Well, it's somewhat related to my first one about his wry humor, but I was so struck by his joyous curiosity. He was rarely satisfied with conventional wisdom, let alone dogma. So he literally chased after nature. I mean, I'm serious. There was one scene when he was riding horseback with some friends at a Maryland estate, and his friend spotted a small whirlwind off in the distance and was beginning to rise and collect dust. So in the key writing of his that day, Franklin declared the rest of the company stood looking after this whirlwind. But here it is. But my curiosity being stronger, I followed it. So the conventional wisdom at the time, for some reason, was that if you shot a bullet through a whirlwind, it would dissipate. So he got up close, riding his horse, at this whirlwind swirling around. He's on his horse with his whip snapping at the whirlwind to no effect. So he wrote up his observations, and England's Royal Society printed them and then read them to the society about these weather conditions that were producing these large eddies. They're called whirlwinds on land or waterspouts when they're at sea. And James Cook, the renowned British explorer, commended Franklin for saying that these were the most rational account I have ever read about these natural phenomena. So finally, can you read us a short passage from your book? Let me take a crack. A fuller take of Benjamin Franklin must process the multiplicities we often ignore in our nation's founders. Franklin owned slaves, but he proposed legislation to abolish the practice. He fathered a son out of wedlock, but he raised and adored that child until, of course, that son became a fervent British loyalist and Benjamin a fervent American patriot. I have come to appreciate this complex man's continued relevance. As zealots impose their religious beliefs, he makes the case for tolerance. As partisans increase their stridency, he shows the value of compromise and civility. As censors ban books and limit debate, he defends printers and free speech. As autocrats seek to centralize authority, he demonstrates what local associations can do by themselves. In our narrow view today of America as either red or blue, and our arguments as only for or against, Franklin suggests a more nuanced world, one that is ultimately more fascinating and entertaining. Yet we must admit Benjamin is difficult to pigeonhole politically, making him hard for today's adherents to exploit. While certainly an advocate for the middle class, he was more practical than partisan, more concerned about solving community challenges than supporting a party or cause. The cause he did embrace was science, and the one constancy of his long life was his appreciation for, even idolization, of ingenuity. He sought out the clever and displayed an almost boundless curiosity, utilizing imagination and investigation to understand the natural and political environments around him. So that's it. Thanks again to the Boulder Bookstore and to you for turning in. I hope you enjoy Ingenious, a biography of Benjamin Franklin, scientist. Thanks very much.